The Green Bay Packers ended last year with an extremely high note, destroying the Dallas Cowboys in the playoff in hilarious fashion. So today, let's talk about where the Green Bay Packers currently stand and what I think their future is going to be like. Today's video is going to be broken down into different segments. I want to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, as well as where I think this team needs to go moving forward. And at the end of the video, we're going to be doing 3 4-round mock drafts for the Green Bay Packers. Without further ado, let's hop into it. And we're going to begin with the good things about this Green Bay Packers team. And let's get this out of the way. The number one good thing about this team, they have a good coach. Last year, they destroyed the Dallas Cowboys, put 60 on their head time, and made their defense look like Swiss cheese. And I think they've been a pretty consistent unit in general. Yes, they've had better days, and yes, they've had worse days, but for the most part, they've been a pretty consistent coaching staff. And now that you're going to bring in a new defensive coordinator, I really hope this defensive coaching staff can really fix a lot of the problems that came from last year. Last year's defense was really bizarre because there's a lot of talent on this roster, like 4 guys who are legitimately good pass rushers, a pretty solid secondary all around, but they didn't really play up to expectations. And I think a lot of that was due to the fact that the defensive coaching staff did not understand the strengths of this team. Now, that's not to say that this defense has a ton of talent in comparison to other rosters, but there's enough talent here to get the job done. So I think that now you have a new defensive coordinator and get some new guys in there in the defensive room. I think it could bring out the best of what you already have on this team. The next good thing you have is, well, you have a good quarterback. Jordan Love last year really broke out, especially in the second half of the year. Had he played like he did the second half of the year for the entire year, we're talking about a guy who could have been the MVP. Jordan Love is borderline top 10. Some people might already have him in their top 10, and to be honest with you, I really won't disagree. He's got everything you want in a modern day quarterback: a strong arm, strong mobility, good pocket presence, good awareness, good anticipation, good touch, basically all of that. Is there things he needs to work on? Yes, but I view those things as coachable and things that he's going to develop as time goes on. You now give him a second year as a starting quarterback, he's going to continue to grow continuity with not only the offensive line, but also his weapons like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jayden Reed. And to me, that is a really big deal for a quarterback, especially as young as Jordan Love is. The next good thing I like about this team is they're relatively talented. Again, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jayden Reed have just started to really touch the potential of what they can be in the NFL. You also had a breakout star in Zach Tom, who's going to be playing right tackle or potentially left tackle on your team, and I really hope that he can develop to become that lockdown tackle for the next 10 to 15 years. And defensively, you have guys like Xavier McKinney, Jair Alexander, Quay Walker, Rashawn Gary, who are all extremely talented and already playing at very high levels. The next good on this team is I think they had a really solid free agency. Was it perfect? No. I did not love getting rid of Aaron Jones. However, you brought in Josh Jacobs, who I think could be your 3 down every down back, to go along with bringing a guy like Xavier McKinney, who I think is a fantastic addition on this defense. I really like the Xavier McKinney deal a little bit more than the Josh Jacobs deal, even though I still think the Josh Jacobs deal is pretty solid overall. To dive deeper into the Xavier McKinney deal, last year their free safety and strong safety duo was one of the worst in the NFL. Now you bring in a free safety like Xavier McKinney, who is generally arguably the best free safety in the NFL. I think there's a really strong case to be made that he is that, on a deal that, in my opinion, is extremely worth it. He's a leader, he's a playmaker, he's a good tackler, good in run support, good in pass coverage. I mean, there's really no downsides to that addition. You now give Jair Alexander something to go along with him in that secondary, and I think that's going to be a very fun combination moving forward. And the last really good thing to go along with a ton of other good things I could have mentioned, but to kind of concise it all into a couple groups, they're a very young team. In fact, I want to say they are the youngest team in the NFL. Their quarterback, very young. Their 3 starting wide receivers, very young. Their tight ends, very young. For the most part, their offensive line, pretty young. And defensively, Xavier McKinney's pretty young. Rashawn Gary's pretty young. Lucas Van Ness is pretty young. Yes, you have some older guys like Kenny Clark and Preston Smith, but for the most part, this defense and offense is extremely young, which means they haven't even quite hit their full potential quite yet. But as for any team, we got to talk about some of the negatives of this roster. There's not a ton of huge negatives here, but there are a handful that I had to kind of nitpick in this team. The number one bad thing about this roster is going to be their offensive line is just kind of meh. Elton Jenkins at left guard and Zach Tom at right tackle are your shining bright players, but Rasheed Walker at left tackle, Josh Myers, and Sean Ryan in their interior offensive line are just kind of mediocre. They're definitely not the worst players in their position in the NFL, and I think ideally you would like to find replacements for those guys either in this year's draft or potentially in next year's draft. Really, the biggest problem with this offensive line is their right guard, Sean Ryan. He's just really not that good, to be honest with you, but again, Rasheed Walker playing that left tackle spot might be a little bit more of an important position to try to address early on in this year's draft. It's part of the reason why basically every single mock draft, including mine, have basically locked them in to get a left tackle or even an interior offensive lineman in this year's draft. The next bad thing on this team is going to be their run defense. Last year, the defense defense ranked 25th in opponents' yards per rush, 26th in opponents' rushes per game, 28th in opponent rush yards per game, and 24th in opponents' rushing touchdowns per game. And obviously that was not 100% due to the fact that the defense was just not talented enough. It mainly had to do more with the system around them. However, I think getting a big run stuffer up the middle could definitely be in play this offseason. In fact, we're going to talk about part of the reason why I think that was a big problem for them last year here in a little bit. But the run defense really has to improve, and I really hope that this new defensive coaching staff is going to come in here and make that a priority. The one issue with their defensive line is they're all kind of more pass rush oriented. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Devontae Wyatt, Kenny Clark are all guys who are pass rush first type of guys. They're all guys who got over 5, 8 to 9 sacks in the season. But they're also decent run stuffers, but none of them are fantastic run stuffers. So as time goes on, I want to see this team try to improve in that regard of the defense, because if they can really be solid run stuffers, this defense can really take that next step, because pass wise, they actually really weren't that bad. They ranked 18th in opponents' yards per pass, 9th in opponents' passes per game, 13th in opponents' pass yards per game. So this is a defense that was solid overall in pass coverage, but really needs to improve in their run defense. Sticking on the defense here, another bad this team has is they need playmakers. They need guys who can create some turnovers. Last year, sticking with the passing defense, they ranked 28th in opponents' interception thrown percentage, which was at a 1.45%, which means this team really needs to find some guys who can create some turnovers. Jair Alexander only had one turnover made last year, which was a forced fumble. And yes, he did have some injuries last year, so it's a little bit more understandable. They did bring in Xavier McKinney, who had 4 turnovers last year with 3 interceptions and 1 forced fumble. But outside of that, none of their guys really create big turnovers. Like, they need somebody who can come in there and just force turnovers. They need like a Trevon Diggs like player, and I think Xavier McKinney can help that issue out big time. But I want to see them find somebody in this year's draft who can just go in there and catch a couple interceptions. I also think some of that is due to the coaching staff as well. I think going out there and really shoving down forcing fumbles and shoving down forcing turnovers down their throats on this defense could really help this defense out big time, because part of the reasons why they were struggling last year defensively is because they really could not create any turnovers. The last bad thing before we start talking about some of the ugly things that are going to be going on with this team is they really need to find a new strong safety. Right now, their starting strong safety is Anthony Johnson Jr., and I think he's a solid rotational safety, but by no means should he be your starter. You already have a fantastic free safety in Xavier McKinney, so going out there and getting a more physical, deliberate tackler at the strong safety position who can also create some turnovers would be more of something that you would want to find. Somebody who can play in the box while also being able to rotate into playing a safety position would be what I'd be looking for. Lastly, let's talk about 2 ugly things on this team. We're going to start off with the uglier of the 2, the linebacking core. I like Quay Walker, but Isaiah McDuffie and Aaron Mosby just are not getting the job done. And yes, you have some young, talented backups like Christian Young and Keyshawn Banks, and maybe at some point those guys could be something. However, ideally, I'd want to find somebody in this year's draft who can come in and be a playmaker. And fortunately for them, it's not a loaded linebacker class, but there should be some options available with your 2nd or 3rd round pick. Again, I like Quay Walker, and I don't think Isaiah McDuffie's the worst in the world, but you really want to find somebody who's more of a star in that position. I think Quay Walker could be a star, but you got to find somebody next to him. It was part of the reason why the run defense was so bad last year, because the linebackers just could not create tackles behind the line of scrimmage, and I think finding somebody who can do that should be a priority for them. The last ugly is going to be the Jordan Love contract. Anytime that you have a quarterback who's going to get paid over $40 to $50 million per year, that's really going to severely handicap your roster and what moves you can make in the long-term future. Fortunately for them, they've already kind of built a championship level roster around Jordan Love, so it shouldn't be the biggest deal in the world. However, come 4 to 5 years down the line, if they haven't still won that championship, you could probably look back at that Jordan Love contract and kind of point a small finger at that as to why they haven't got the job done. But now I want to rotate now into our 3 full-round mock drafts. This is a Packers team that has quite a good number of draft picks in this year's draft. They have 6 draft picks in the first 4 rounds, so we got a lot to talk about. We're going to go through each mock draft and hopefully you guys can catch my drift. For each mock draft, I decided to take no repeat players, so every single mock draft is going to have different players taken at every single pick. So with my first mock draft, I took Jackson Powers Johnson. There really wasn't a tackle available on the board who I really liked over Jackson Powers Johnson. I think Powers Johnson could replace Josh Myers at center or even replace Sean Ryan at right guard. Either way, you're getting a big bowling ball, physical interior offensive lineman who's very solid in pass protection as well. Then at 41, I decided to take Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota. He's going to be playing our strong safety role to replace Anthony Johnson Jr. Not necessarily somebody who's going to create a ton of turnovers, but somebody who, in my opinion, could be a physical brawler tackler who can fill in both the box safety position or even playing free safety at times as well. At 58, I took the highest upside linebacker that was on the board, and that was Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. He's somebody who has really good intangibles, but just really needs to work on more of the mental side of the game. To me, he's going to be filling in more of that Sam linebacker role, but he also could fill in at that middle linebacker position at times as well. At 88, I really wanted to find a change of pace running back, so I went with Trey Benson. To me, he is the highest upside speedy running back that was available on the board. I think he'll probably fill in at that running back 3 role, but he's going to be your change of pace option next to Josh Jacobs and AJ Dillon. 91, I took Renardo Green, the Florida State cornerback. To me, he's somebody who can create some turnovers, create some big plays, and can develop to at some point be your cornerback 2 on your roster. Is he going to start? No, but I think he could fill in easily at that cornerback 4 position, and then as time goes on and after he gets more trust in the coaching staff, could be your cornerback 2. And because I didn't fill in at that tackle position, I decided to take the highest upside tackle in Christian Jones from Texas. His draft stock has been rising, and I think after a few successful years with the Texas Longhorns, his draft stock has come up high enough for me to take him at pick 126. Is he fantastic at anything necessarily? Not necessarily. However, he's big, he's physical, and he's gotten better every single year at Texas, so I do think if he can be on a very good coaching staff who can develop him, he could at some point be that starting right tackle of your team and move Zach Tom over to left tackle. With my second mock draft, again, I tried to pick different players at every single pick, so with pick 25, I took Amarius Mims, a high upside right tackle out of Georgia. Again, you're going to move Zach Tom to left tackle, you're going to have your long-term right tackle solution with Amarius Mims. At 41, I took Mike Sarenstiel, the Michigan slot corner. He's going to fill in again at that slot corner position. Not necessarily somebody who I expect to get a ton of turnovers on this team, but I do think he could create a couple forced interceptions or forced fumbles. He's a physical tackler as well, so I think he's going to fill in nicely at that slot corner position, which is somewhat of a position of need for this Packers team. At 58, sticking with Michigan here, I took Junior Colson, the linebacker again from Michigan. He's more of your traditional middle linebacker, and unlike Edgerrin Cooper, he doesn't really have intangibles that blow you away, but he does have the mental aspect of the game down. At 88, again, I wanted to find a speedy running back that can be your change of pace option here, so I went with Marshawn Lloyd. He's got genuine track speed. He just needs to kind of figure out how to use his eyes better. At number 91, I went with Cedric Van Pran from Georgia. He's played center for a long time there. He's just very solid overall. I think he's going to be somebody who's going to be a backup for several years, and then maybe at some point could be your long-term starter at center. And then lastly, with pick 126, I went with Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa. He's a high upside defensive interior player who dominated in the FCS level. I think he's somebody who could be a high upside rotational defensive interior player who could be a very solid run stuffer, as well as somebody who maybe at some point could get you 5 to 10 sacks in a year. Put him behind a guy like Devontae Wyatt and Kenny Clark, he might be able to learn a couple things and really turn into a very solid rotational piece for that team. And then with my third mock draft, I went with Kool-Aid McKinstry with my first round pick. He's somebody who's super smart, has very good instincts, very good size, range, and physicality. Does he create a ton of turnovers? No. I did have Nate Wiggins on the board, so if you want more turnovers, I would take Nate Wiggins, but I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is a better cornerback, so I went with Kool-Aid McKinstry. With pick 41, I went with Zach Frazier. I didn't love any of the tackle prospects at pick 41, so I went with the best interior offensive lineman. He can fill in either at guard or center, and is just a very solid overall player. At 58, I'm going to absolutely butcher this name, so if I get it wrong, just roast me in the comments. I don't care. I went with Kyron Amangaji. I hope I didn't say that right, or I hope I did say that right. He plays tackle from Yale. He's big. He looks absolutely massive in comparison to all the players he went up against. Needs to work on his pad level, but also does have very good understanding of how to use his leverage. I think he's a developmental piece who could be your starting tackle to start the year off, but is probably going to struggle early on, so I want to see him develop and take time to eventually be the starting left tackle or right tackle on this Packers team. Next up, I went with Bucky Irving, the Oregon running back. I needed somebody who was speedy and fast, and I didn't want to repeat taking Trey Benson or Marshawn Lloyd, so I went with the next best option, and to me that was going to be Bucky Irving. He is short and does have a very small frame, but he is extremely fast, and I think when he knows his path of running, he's going to get there instantly. Next up with pick 91, I went with Tommy Eichenberg, the Ohio State linebacker. Was a veteran team captain of Ohio State for several years. He's physical enough in the run support that I think he could be at least a decent run stuffer, but is really better at being a pass coverage guy. Again, he's somebody who you want to develop, and I don't think he'll be your starter, but I do think for pick 91, it was decent value to go ahead and try him out. Lastly, at pick 126, I was very happy to see this guy still available. Muhammad Kamara out of Colorado State, a high upside pass rusher who's also very very solid in run support as well. I know you already have a couple young defensive edge rushers like Lucas Van Ness and Kingsley. However, I wanted to find somebody else who can come in there and just continue to add young bodies into this defensive line room. Especially when you move off of guys like Preston Smith, you can just easily move Bo Kamara back in to be your backup behind Lucas Van Ness. So again, those are my 3 mock drafts. So that is going to be my 3 mock drafts. If you guys disagree with the picks I took, let me know in the comment section below. And if you are a Packers fan, you guys tell me who you guys want this team to take. And if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. And I love you guys. Peace.